Germany's Social Democrats have pulled off a narrow election win in the eastern state of Brandenburg. Polls had the far-right Alternative for Germany ahead, but in a record turnout at the ballot box, voters fended off the AfD, choosing the incumbent SPD, the party of Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It's only a slender victory for the centre-left, leaving question marks over Scholz's future nationally. Most notable are the AfD's gains of almost 6% since the last election. The Conservative CDU didn't muster up enough support to give the SPD a solid partner in any coalition. That creates a cliffhanger. It's uncertain who the winners can team up with to govern the state. The new left-leaning Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance, or BSW, did extremely well. The Greens disappointed.
Finally, something to cheer about. For weeks, the Social Democrats have been trailing in this election. But a late swing seems to have secured the SPD state premier here another 5 years in power. And yet, it was the second-place finish of the far-right AfD that got prominence in his victory speech.
If an openly, in large parts and in its entirety right-wing extremist party can achieve around 30% of the vote in our state, that is a huge alarm signal for all of us, for all Democrats, and for all those who stand for freedom, openness, and tolerance.
This was the moment the Alternative for Germany learned they hadn't come first. Still, a second-place finish is reason enough to be happy for a party that, despite being designated partly right-wing extremist by security services, is growing in strength.
We are the party of the future. If you want political change and transition, then you will have to vote for the AfD. This is a partial victory, and we are celebrating this victory today. The next elections are coming, and we will be right at the front for sure.
It was a miserable night for the Christian Democrats. They'd hoped to capitalise anger towards the parties in power in Berlin, but they ended up losing support. But despite the tears, they could well end up back in coalition. The Greens didn't get enough votes to return to Parliament, which could present a coalition possibility for the new kid on the block. The Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance, which mixes left-wing economic policies with a tough line on migration, managed a solid 13.5%, despite this being their first Brandenburg election. For now, though, the winner of the night is Brandenburg's SPD leader. His future almost certainly secured, and with it, the pressure on the national government relieved for now.
Over to our political correspondent, Giulia Saudelli. Explain that surge for the far right, first of all.
Yeah, well, we've seen that the far-right AfD has been quite successful in the eastern states of Germany for quite some time now, but they have now brought back and brought home their biggest successes yet in all three states that have seen elections, Thuringia, Saxony, and now Brandenburg. And the AfD has built a lot of this success on the widespread frustration that is quite strong in parts of eastern Germany, and especially since the reunification of Germany, these were parts of the country that were part of communist East Germany, the GDR, and we still see some differences, some discrepancies between the East and the West, for example, when we look at salaries, when we look at pensions. But there is this sense that since the reunification, people in Eastern Germany have been left behind from the central government in Berlin, that they are considered second-class citizens and that they feel looked down upon from people in the West. And the AfD has built on this frustration to also build up its own success. Now, we also seen from polling that there are voters of the AfD that are voting for the party in protest against the central government in Berlin. There is widespread dissatisfaction with the central government there. But we also see, from polling, that there is a large share of AfD voters that vote for the party because they believe in the party's platform. And that platform has largely been based on the issue of migration. And we've seen that, for example, in these eastern states especially, they don't have a large share of migrants and refugees compared to other parts of Germany. But this frustration we've talked about has been channeled into the issue of refugees and migration in general. And the AfD has made that their central issue for their campaigning, and it seems to have worked.
Considering the results, take us through the tricky task of building a coalition.
Now, this is something we've also seen in Thuringia and Saxony, where the AfD came in first or second, and we're seeing also now in Brandenburg. The other parties do not want to form a coalition with the AfD. They do not want to cooperate with them, and this means also in Brandenburg that they are likely out of the game, even though they came in second, quite close to the first party, the SPD. We've heard from the SPD, the Social Democrats, that they would like to come into talks with the conservative CDU party. The problem there is that the two parties together are missing one seat in the parliament to form a majority, making it difficult for them to govern together, just the two of them. Another option for the SPD would be to go into talks with the populist, left-leaning Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance, a new party that has emerged quite successfully in this election here. But the leader of the SPD in Brandenburg, Dietmar Woidke, has said he doesn't want to talk to the Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance. He sees the party as a black box. And we also know that there are some disagreements between the Social Democrats and the Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance. For example, on support for Ukraine, Sahra Wagenknecht has strongly criticized the central government in Berlin, led by the SPD, for its support to Ukraine. So it will likely be tricky for them to form an alliance, and the negotiations in general are likely to be complicated.
And what about the consequences for Chancellor Olaf Scholz?
Well, Olaf Scholz is currently in New York attending the UN General Assembly there, but we've seen from a little video snippet that he is quite satisfied with the results. He said these are great results for the SPD, but also for all of us, he said. Now, this is going to be a sigh of relief for the Chancellor and his party because they have done pretty badly in the previous regional elections that we saw at the beginning of the month, and because the government that the SPD leads is polling terribly. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the government. But this sigh of relief is likely to be short-lived, also because the Chancellor had little to do with the success of the SPD in Brandenburg. We've seen from polls that up to 3/4 of people who voted for the SPD did so not because they believe in the party, but because they wanted to counter the AfD. And also, the Chancellor didn't really play a role in the campaign in Brandenburg. It was mostly led to success by Dietmar Woidke, the state premier there, who tried to keep the Chancellor at a distance during the campaign. So there will be a lot of open questions now for the SPD and for Olaf Scholz, whether he is actually the right person to lead the party into the election campaign ahead of the national elections that are happening next year here in Germany.
DW's Giulia Saudelli from the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Thank you for your reporting.